If you don't want to hear me singing, skip ahead to this timestamp, please.
Starfield is a game that came out this year. It was delayed twice. Why is it not good, man? Why is it bad, man? I don't know. I wish this game was better, but it's not, and it feels AI generated. Todd, what the fuck did you do to space? I feel like this is such a disgrace, but I can't stop myself from playing, cause I thought there would be a lightsaber. There's not. Waiting for mods, yeah. Waiting for mods, yeah. To mod midfield.
Hi.
Okay.
Starfield is a game that I was excited for, but I had tempered expectations going into it, as I didn't enjoy the last few releases by Bethesda Game Studios, mostly Fallout 4 and Fallout 76. Bethesda advertised us a new universe that has been 25 years in the making, according to the official teaser trailer on June 13th, 2021. For a new IP, you'd figure they'd pull out all the big guns, their A-game in all fronts for this game, as it's the first thing to come out of them that's new, but also the exclusive that should put Xbox on the map. I've often thought about whether Starfield would reinvigorate my love for Bethesda's worlds and the stories they tell. Did Starfield live up to the hype? No, I wouldn't say so. Instead, I felt like I was greeted with a relatively mediocre game front-loaded with intrigue, but odd pacing, and menus. Starfield, again according to the first teaser trailer, says, create any character you want and explore with unparalleled freedom as you embark on an epic journey to answer humanity's greatest mystery.
So that was a fucking lie.
For a game with 1,000 planets, the longer my playthrough went on, it felt as if I've seen most of them without making the trip. Starfield is a vast game that will be impossible to accurately judge this early after release, and I see it as a game that will be talked about for years to come. Not on its praises as being truly groundbreaking or shaking up the genre, but rather for its more negative aspects that I'll get into. It's going to be a long one, so buckle in, folks. Disclaimer, because obviously you need one of those for an opinion piece. Yes, this is my opinion. After one playthrough where I've completed 2 faction quests, handcrafted 2 ships of my own, messed around with some pre-mades, I've done a fair amount of side quests, completed the main quest, I reached level 38 and about 67 hours of playtime. So buckle in as I give my pros and cons about Starfield and how I feel about Bethesda's design philosophy over the recent years. Starfield, as described by so many reviewers and fans, is a Bethesda-ass Bethesda game, according to Jake Baldino from GameRings and a few other YouTube reviewers. This sentiment is shared amongst the overall community from a few searches on Twitter or Reddit, and amongst the articles discussing Starfield, the newest release, and a return to form for Bethesda. So, before we can get into Starfield, what even is considered a Bethesda-ass Bethesda game? Well, according to Jake, it's a game with cool characters, cool lore, some fun weapons, good adventuring, and some mysteries. This is definitely an extremely divisive game, as I see some people love it, other people hate it, and there's a good amount of people that fall into the middle ground of this game as it's alright. I wouldn't say I sway towards one side of the ultimatum or the other, but I more so land in the middle. The game feels extremely lacking to previous titles by this studio in some aspects. Other aspects are fun, but I don't want to say this game does anything particularly better. Starfield just feels like an average RPG that quote-unquote tries. I say this in quotes because it doesn't feel like a legitimate attempt for a game that's been over 25 years in the making, in Todd Howard's words. One thing that I've noticed as a sentiment amongst older fans of Bethesda's RPGs is that as time goes on, they try to focus on pulling in the majority of players, making their games a mile wide and an inch deep, or so the saying goes. Pulling in as many people as possible, snatching them up in the back of the van, but instead of promising candy, Todd is promising you an immersive RPG that you can really get lost in. According to Pete Hines in an interview, he states, "This game doesn't even really get going until you finish the main quest. To his credit, he also says that the game is impossible to tell what somebody's done based on their hours since the world is so vast, which I can partly agree with. There's a big chance a lot of you had a completely different experience to the one I had in this game. To me, Starfield is anything but an in-depth experience that I feel like I can get lost into as an RPG because so much of this game is subjective, and I feel as if a lot of it goes into this mentality of really trying to force yourself to fall for the world and the characters. I'm a firm believer that to enjoy a game, you need to give it a good shake, but just like anything in life, if you don't try for yourself, then how do you really know if it's for you? Lots of people say Starfield is a divisive game, and I must concur. I want to discuss some of the stories I've experienced in my time with Starfield. I'll try not to spoil everything and keep it brief for those who have not gotten a chance to play these areas yet or just don't want to know, but I do want to discuss some aspects of it as I feel it takes away from the experience. Let's start with the main quest. You're a miner that just got hired to work for Lynn, a contractor on a desolate planet that doesn't matter too much. After going through the tutorial, you touch an artifact and it gives you a vision. After a few moments of story progression, you're told to join up with Constellation, hand deliver the artifact, and see what happens from there. This is where the game introduces you to the main cast of Constellation. I'll talk about some of the companions later as I feel these sections should be split up. But after conversing, you're told to partner up with Sarah Morgan and start following some leads to track down potential artifacts. The main quest also serves as a pipeline to the faction quests. Similar to how in Skyrim, on your way to do things for the main quest line, the factions are shoveled in there as a theme park attraction to get you started. The main quest can be broken down into fetch quests for artifacts and again for the powers of this game. The artifacts are relatively intriguing as you learn more about them as the quest goes on, but the quest line itself is just the equivalent of doing a Radiant quest to some random planet and location with no real personality. Take out the Crimson Fleet or Ecliptic Mercs, collect the artifact, and go home. It does spice up in what I'd consider the midpoint or latter half as the more interesting concepts of the game get introduced, but I felt myself getting bogged down by the repetitive nature of everything. The powers, on the other hand, are a cool way to try and keep dragon shouts again from Skyrim again into this game. It feels like they're taking a lot from Skyrim, funnily enough, besides the good aspects. The powers serve as a way to shake up the combat and other experiences, with some being used for damage, utility, information, or resource gathering. I'd praise them for being fun, but a lot of this is just already in Skyrim aside from the gravity specific ones, so I don't want to compliment them just for copy pasting again. The way you acquire powers has to be the worst part of this experience though. It's part of the main story at first as they have you check out a temple. From the outside looking in, this looks promising, and maybe a tailor-made dungeon or a new area to explore in the game world. You would be sorely mistaken though, as these just serve as a repetitive minigame to acquire each and every ability with no variation. Seriously, the developers couldn't be bothered to spice this up a bit or add something to it. Let's take a look at Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild for that matter. Those games introduced, let's say, about 5 abilities you'll use throughout your playthrough. Instead of just adding them as afterthoughts and a gimmick you could do, it becomes part of the core gameplay and why it's such a refreshing experience compared to a lot of other open world titles and adventure games in general. There's even an included tutorial where each shrine will grant you the power and then you're shown how to use it in a mini dungeon. This is genius as it teaches the player how to use it through the game to solve problems in their own way instead of tutorials or having to read a menu screen. Something like this should have been considered for Starfield, as now it gives more importance to the powers. It doesn't feel like you're doing the same thing for 20 hours or so, and now you're actually using all the gameplay systems you designed to enhance one another and make the gameplay feel unique to Starfield. Instead, what we got was copy-paste locations to grab a power, the equivalent of a word wall by the way, but longer and more tedious as now you have to factor in all the loading screens and the shitty light minigame that's only fun once. The worst part is, the devs know you probably wouldn't care about the system. You could argue they made it optional to incentivize exploration, but stick with me for a second. Towards the end of the main quest, it's recommended you get all the powers, but it's not needed as they won't change the final encounter of this game at all. It just feels like flavor text, same with the backgrounds and traits you picked. Speaking of traits, while certainly interesting and they do have their uses for the most part, it's very sporadic as characters or situations where they're usable are few and far in between. For example, I chose the Neon Street Rat perk as the city sounded interesting, so I thought I'd spend more time here and use it. I did use it a fair bit, but it's all just flavor text aside from one time it got me out of jail. Other than this though, it just serves as you have an extra dialogue option with NPCs, but it doesn't add anything specific to the rest of your conversations or interactions with them. It's very, oh yeah, you're from Neon, so you know what it's like, cool. Anyways, And most interactions are like this. I wasn't expecting it to lead to a whole new branch of quests, but it would have been nice if these could have been used to either enhance or change relationships with other NPCs, as now it can be a way to further define your character. I'm not the bounty hunter that grew up in the neon slums. I'm Mr. Goody Two-Shoes Constellations errand boy because that's what the game pigeonholes you into. So, the main quest is a bit mundane. What about the faction quests? Well, being already on Neon, I thought I'd join Ryujin Industries to see what the experience was like for me. Aside from an interesting opening quest that shows you the quote-unquote dark side of the company and its surroundings, the rest of the questline is just being told Ryujin is the best of the best and demands the best from you, its employee. Each mission is pretty brain-dead as they're just framing jobs or numbers jobs from Skyrim. Again, Radiant quest design at its finest. After you make it through these quests though, it does have a more handcrafted approach as it pushes you into doing these stealth operations for the company. This is fun, but admittedly a lot of the levels feel to play the same as the only interactable stealth option is just opening vents and walking through those instead of the ground floor. Why can't I shoot my gun to have a rock throwing effect and get an enemy to investigate that? Or where is the option to kill the lights to further enhance my ability to stealth? This last part was present in one quest only during this faction questline. I don't know why that wasn't used for different areas or a way for the player to just have more options when choosing to want to stealth locations. Overall, the questline was pretty lackluster. The reward was interesting, albeit balanced to become mediocre, so I forgot about it for most of my playthrough. And the NPCs don't stick out much at all, so while there was choices to make towards the end of the questline, I didn't feel bothered to pick one side in particular as the NPCs aside from Constellation are just talking pieces of cardboard. They don't have enough personality or things involving them for me to care. In contrast, the UC questline starts off a lot stronger as you have to deal with an imposing threat, and the questline plays out a lot more like an action cop movie, which is fun. But they also reuse the gimmick of that quest a few times as well, instead of adding new things to each level or quest. Side quests are no better, as the cities and areas can be so big but so lifeless as they're usually one-offs. This is fine, but there wasn't a single side quest I could get invested into as the choices felt like things that I didn't want to make, or the characters just again had relatively simple fetch quests. Most of the side questing I did was in New Atlantis and Neon. I expected Neon to have a lot more character than New Atlantis, or to just be a stark contrast as it's advertised as a danger city, but no, it just feels like the same thing with bright lights. Even the supposed gang quest line, it was about 3 quests if I'm not mistaken, and was more interesting than the region questline, but it falls flat because it's short. Taking place in Ebside, the dangerous neighborhood in Neon, the area is given a lot of character in the scenery. The open apartments that most people sleep in because they can't afford real homes gives it this air of despair, and yeah, this place is run down, but you spend so little time in it and don't meet anyone in this district to care for. There's a quest or two to join this gang called the Strikers, which is presented as a cool conflict between two sides that I'll get involved in and maybe make a difference. While yes, that's what happens, the members you meet, you know them for about 3 quests or so, and you won't interact with them again as they get tasked with something new that doesn't involve you. So your time in Neon with things to be excited over or ways to get involved in characters falls flat. It doesn't help that if you aren't doing good things, your Constellation homies will just use every breath to rag on you and what you're doing.
There.
I can't understand this sudden urge to join the Strikers gang. I can think of about 100 better ways you could be spending your time.
The companions of Starfield aren't the worst in a BGS game, but unless you fall for their personalities or are very interested in getting to know them, their inclusion just falls flat. It doesn't help that not every character or Constellation is somebody you will get to travel with or get to know. If you don't willfully interact with them aside from the 4 main companions of Sarah, Barrett, Andresia, and Sam Coe, then you'll only be traveling with Walter once, and Mateo you take a short walk with. You get a chance to speak to everyone when you first join, but the game doesn't offer these characters enough time to shine in their own questline, and so they can just be ignored. It also doesn't help that they're all morally aligned to be good characters, so things such as intimidation, theft, and even just over-encumbering yourself are ragged on and nitpicked by them. I wish there were more options in the game to find a different group with companions, or a random person that would be interesting. Some people will argue you can pick up the hires from random coffee shops and bars, but I want the characters in my crew to be people I know, not the generic, randomly generated NPCs the game throws at you. Honestly, even most of the Skyrim companions are bland. At least they don't try to tell me what to do. You can't even reason with your own companions or discuss how you want to approach scenarios, which just makes them even more of a nuisance at times. They're not all bad, and their quests can be intriguing, but I was left unimpressed with the main 4. These are the only characters you can romance as well, by the way, so if you don't like them, well, tough luck, buddy. The companions try to come off as real people, but it's done in a pretty inorganic way in my opinion. While they will comment during questlines and things the player does, it feels forced, and what they say doesn't really get acknowledged unless they were actually supposed to be there for that quest. I'm assuming Bethesda tried to take inspiration from great RPGs like Knights of the Old Republic, but unlike KOTOR, their dialogue inclusion doesn't feel well done. For example, if I complete a faction questline in Starfield, even if they weren't present for the quests, and not even on my ship when I get back to the lodge, they'll have things to say to me about these encounters for some reason. What, did I just spill the beans without consciously doing it? In KOTOR, on the other hand, the characters will comment and say things when we're on planets, and they'll form their own opinions on what we should do. If they don't morally align with what you did, they'll disagree. Or they'll agree, but that's not all they do, so they don't feel like programmed responses. The party members will even banter and talk amongst themselves, or ask you thoughts on what's going on and how to resolve an issue they're having in their personal lives. And it feels a lot more fluid to listening to something like Karth and Mission Veo bantering and making fun of each other over Sarah Morgan telling me joining a gang is dumb and bad, SMH bro. Perhaps this could have helped by having 2 companions at once, not sure why Bethesda hasn't tried this idea yet. Maybe because it's more work to make natural sounding relationships and fun talks between friends, but regardless, as it is now, the characters just feel extremely stiff. The exploration in Starfield has to be, surprise surprise, a mostly empty bag. Once you've been to one planet, I'd argue you've been to them all. While yes, there is new wildlife and resources to see on each planet, there isn't a huge reason as to why you'd want to interact with the wildlife. Perhaps there are some cool features, but for the most part, aside from seeing what's out there, they don't feel any different aside from the aesthetic. The alien lifeforms all serve a similar purpose as the randomly generated AI NPCs. They're just there to make the world seem busier than it is. Why not show them interacting with the environment, grazing, or running away from predators in different ways, instead of just standing there to die until a bigger fish comes along to kill this predator? It screams this sense of simulation, but not in the way I'm sure Bethesda wants. A simulation as in, it's an exhibit, not a game. What is the fun in touching down on this planet? The gunplay is satisfying, yes, but that's not enough to warrant me wanting to touch down on all these planets in hopes of finding anything other than the random loot from enemies or randomly placed chests. If there was a bit more handcrafted questing, perhaps the hunt for a unique weapon of sorts, just like the quest for Ryujin Industries, I think I could get behind the idea of exploring. Exploring could be more than what it is, but it just feels like a shell of how it was in past BGS titles. You could argue, what is there to see in Skyrim aside from the quest lines in the main towns and factions, or the popular side quests? But the world itself is interconnected and fully handcrafted. This makes for a world that feels cohesive and fun to roam around in, even if you're not doing anything in particular. The exploration itself felt much more organic over to how it is in Starfield. For example, if I want to explore a new system, I'd have to open up the map, select the galaxy, select the planet from the galaxy, but no, you can't land straight on there because the planet is something you've never been to before. You have to land in its atmosphere, then you have to go back into the menu, open a spot, pick a spot on the planet, confirm you want to land, watch a loading screen, then prompt yourself to exit the ship again and go through another loading screen. I'm sure you can see how this becomes tedious after a few times. This would be a lot better if there was less time spent filtering through menus to get about. Not being able to land on planets directly is a shame, and flying to universes without a loading screen is a letdown. But if there was a way to just add the options you want in-game, it would still feel better than it is now. It seriously hampers any sort of interconnectivity or excitement I should feel when exploring. After about 20 hours, I dreaded having quests off of the planet I'm currently on, as I don't want to spend my time sifting through menus just to reach the next locale. As a fix, why aren't there planets, fast travel locations just present on the planet itself for me to hover my reticle over and choose if I want to land there in-game, instead of having to open my menu if I'm already in that galaxy? This makes it so the player doesn't have to keep exiting the game every 2 seconds just to open a damn menu. It's so incessant for no reason. There had to have been a better way to design this. Aside from the menu spam to wanting to explore new planets, almost all the planets in the game are just dead worlds. Not dead as in there's no life, but dead as in there's truly no content. What is the difference between me exploring the Jemison wildlife over a different planet? There isn't any, because exploration points of interest are just generated on each planet as you visit, so nothing will be an experience tailored to you by the devs. I didn't mind this at first, but the longer you play, it drags on and you really start noticing all the flaws with the system. You're essentially shown a few key points to explore: an uninspired dungeon in the form of a cave or a building occupied by either the Crimson Fleet or Ecliptic mercenaries, random rock structures, or a gravity anomaly. Speaking of, why aren't there more enemy types? Why are these places never overrun by the aliens on the planet? Or the insides more unique than just another pirate base? Aside from the main cities themselves, there really isn't much to see in this game. Let's take the Red Mile as an example. The first time you land at this location, you see something interesting as a patron of the establishment is accused of leaving without paying. He was held at gunpoint by the mercenaries hired to be guards there, which is pretty cool. It seems like it's a shady establishment. There's even an alleged celebrity here and a man named Donovan Reese, a man that's run the Red Mile so many times that he's at the top of the leaderboard. It paints the place as if there's some big prize to win, or that the Red Mile is like an insane experience and there's more to see here than you would in something like, let's say, New Atlantis. Then you run it, and you're just greeted with an absurdly boring course that allows you to just completely not interact with the entire map, or race if you want to call it that. You can just boost pack over everything, get to the end, hit the button, and then do the same thing back. It's advertised to be this exciting race to death, but there's nothing going on with the race to make me feel in any sort of danger. This is just one of the many establishments that looks cool from the outside, but it just ends up playing the same. Whatever the DLC does, or maybe during the game's life cycle, maybe they could update the game and add more to these areas, but I highly doubt it's going to be free. It's not here yet, but I'm sure Starfield will have their own creation club and either sell content this way through DLC expansion slowly, fleshing out the universe. It's honestly a letdown, as it feels like any attempt I made to have a good time exploring, I was met with disappointment and nothing of note to talk about outside this game. The story is a bit lackluster, but what about the gameplay? Does this hold up or add anything new to the Bethesda formula that wasn't in previous titles? Well, aside from the underwater combat, yeah, ship combat is just the equivalent of underwater combat. I'm sorry, no, there's not much of relevance to comment on here. So let's break it down. What does Starfield offer the player in terms of playstyles or alternative ways to approach scenarios? Starfield is an action RPG with a focus on shooting. The game offers you a variety of guns, albeit only the type of gun really changes the feeling, but if you want to boil it down, aside from the sniper and maybe the heavy weapons or shotguns, everything else just plays the same for the most part. You will be taking up a mantle of cover and then be forced to either shoot enemies from afar, or if you're playing on normal, you can just face tank and run into everything. The AI in Starfield is okay at times. Other times they just do random goofy things, like they'll run away from you or they turn around in a doorway and give you free shots at them. It makes the encounter feel pretty samey, except for maybe the environments. There are unique guns, but their uniqueness just boils down to different modifications you can craft for yourself if you choose. I didn't do this as the crafting feels pointless, considering a player will just grab the random guns as they go and have a decent time with that. It's like arguing that yes, smithing is in Skyrim, and you could forge all your gear, but it's not a fun process. You're either going to get trainers to power level it when possible, or you're going to grind it out with jewelry just to craft gear that's going to be outclassed by new stuff in the open world. Seeing as how the crafting system can just be ignored, it's a good thing for players that don't want to engage with it, but it's a bad thing in my opinion as well, because now if you want to roleplay as a technician that excels in modifying guns or spacesuits and the like, it's just put on the sidelines and not really needed. Speaking of this, why are there no NPCs in the world that we can pay to modify our gear if we don't have the skills needed ourselves either? There's not a single person that specializes in a field like this. Why? Because the player can do it themselves if they choose, I guess. It makes the experience a little funny, as in, yeah, I might know how to shoot a gun, but that doesn't mean I'll understand the inner workings of one, or want to for that fact, and I don't want to get involved in those systems if I don't need to. This results in the player relying on RNG loot of the merchants and random ships, or randomly generated areas of loot as they play, and it becomes a bore as I've never really cared for what I got after the first few hours. If it looked cool, I'd wear it, yeah, or if the stats were just objectively better, making the loot just feel like an afterthought, not something the developers actually put their time into in my opinion. Aside from the gunplay, there are other options, right? Maybe the melee will be somewhat good in this game. I would agree with you, but it seems Bethesda just forgot to include that side of the combat tree and said fuck it, they'll be fine with just pressing the mouse button over and over instead of adding any depth towards this system. So you have two options. You can fight with your fists or a melee weapon. These options don't change too much either way, as you'll be speccing into the same perks mostly anyway. Why has Bethesda not just incorporated fists into the melee tree with the other weapons themselves, such as the swords and daggers, since none of those have individual perks? Well, dear viewer, there's an easy answer to this. It's to give you an illusion of choice that just isn't there. If I'm proficient in melee combat, why am I proficient with daggers and swords but not with my fists? Sure, maybe I learned a different fighting style, but okay, if that's true, why is there no way for me to specialize with a sword or specialize with a dagger? And side note, why is there only one style of power attack in the whole game? They got rid of all the omnidirectional stuff you could do in something like Skyrim or Oblivion. As if the melee system didn't have enough depth in Skyrim or Oblivion, but now, aside from just removing weapon types, since guns are the focus, you're also taking away another way to spice up the combat for people who are looking for this. What's the point? All it does is just take away options from the player that might want to roleplay as a Ronin in space. Ronin is a background that you can pick, but as far as I can tell, it doesn't add anything specific to the player, and it feels like a wasted opportunity. Did you know melee weapons can spawn with perks? Me too. Did you ever take a look at the weapons workbench though and see there's not a single way to modify any melee weapon in the game, resulting in having melee players subjected to the RNG of this game, instead of an option to modify an existing weapon they like? You could argue that maybe, what would you do for a new melee weapon or something to add different things to the form of combat? But why don't you just look at other games and just copy them? Biomutant has a good crafting system. Why not take something like that with the random junk used for crafting so the player can have a different way to now interact with the system and add a variety to either the swing effects of weapons or what each weapon does? This feels like such an oversight, as now melee is even more limited than a title like Skyrim, which is constantly getting poked fun at for its combat. Albeit the combat is dated, at least it does more for melee than Starfield. I get that guns were probably a focus, but if that's the case, advertising this as if it's even an option is baffling. It just feels like an oversight from the developers, and maybe they stretched themselves too thin in some areas. I thought there would be more, as this is Bethesda's newest title, but it just seems like things get simpler and simpler each game they make, and it's a shame. The unarmed build has interesting perks on further inspection, but what about melee weapons then? Why don't they benefit from anything in general? At this point, if you want to play a brawler or melee-esque build, it's unarmed or nothing is what it feels like. Continuing on the subject of melee, but this also does apply to ranged weapons as well. Why does the sneak not function properly? I'm not advocating for Skyrim levels of absurdity with the sneak ability, as you can truly breeze through a lot with sneak in that game, but more so just commenting on how any sort of spacesuit, jetpack, or helmet will make you noisy when trying to sneak around. What? Nobody thought to make a stealth suit for covert moon missions? The chameleon perk is there, but half the time it gets seen through if you're too close. It's been discussed how taking off your spacesuit and other gear will allow you to essentially make less noise, and going fully nude is almost as silent, as you'll have no clothing moving around. This is cool if anybody played the game like this. Sure, I could run around in my Batman tighty whities and murder people, but what happens when I get caught? What do I do about stealth on planets or moons without atmospheres? Am I supposed to just pause my game and put on my armor? Yeah, it's an option, but that just requires me to go into the menu, and that's where a lot of this game's issues dwell in my opinion. The more you make the combat seamless, and the less you have to do inventory sorting mid-combat, the better the combat system can be appreciated, as you don't have to take time to do awkward pauses to heal or put on different gear. The favorites menu can somewhat alleviate this, but you can't use the same button to unequip things in turn, which is weird. I'm a firm believer in the less menu surfing you have to do, the better a time a player will have. This is because while menus are integral to a lot of the games and their experiences, the less a player has to sift through items and look at what kind of ammunition X gun uses out of 21, they will have a much more immersive experience, as now instead of focusing on your menus and hotkeys and what to do with X item until now, you can just focus on the game world and what's around you. For the most part, Starfield's UI is relatively sleek and not in your face, which I'd say is a good thing. The health can be a bit hard to keep track of, but otherwise, unless I need to decide what weapons and armor I want equipped, I'm just staring at the scenery around me. The game can definitely be beautiful at times, but aside from the major cities, it's hard to feel impressed by anything too major, as most of the areas feel very copy and paste. As if I'm at the hands of AI generated content, which, for most of Starfield's exploration, you will be. The combat could have been a lot better. Just look at something like Cyberpunk for a first-person combat experience. Even before the 2.0 update, the combat was a step up from Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and now Starfield's versions of melee/gunplay. While I wasn't able to make my hyperdrive ring or the TIE fighter I wanted, the shipbuilder in Starfield kicks ass. Mostly. It's definitely a step up from what I was expecting, but there are some aspects that could definitely be improved upon, and I think would make the shipbuilder even more extensive than it currently is. Let's talk about the basics though. Your ship must have a reactor, grav drive, engines, docking station, cockpit, and fuel. Other than that, you're free to create your ship however you please. You don't have to add weapons technically, but you really should, unless you're going for an insane smuggling run, then fuck it, we ball. Aside from this, you're free to put whatever part you want almost anywhere, and there's good flexibility in the designs. Somebody even made a burger ship. I wouldn't have any complaints and end it there, but there's a lack of curved parts in the shipbuilder that can be attached to one another to make smooth ring-like shapes or a spherical ship. While some parts are smooth, they could definitely add some more, whether that's as DLC, a future update, or mods. I would prefer against it being mods, as this being the option though, and I'll get into that later. Having rounder shapes would be a nice way to add more variety and spice up what you could build. The only other complaint I had was being able to flip the orientation of an object only. You can never set how you want the object to actually align. If there was a way to make it so different structures could be positioned almost anywhere onto another, such as rotating the wings to either stick upright and make a comb-like spaceship, maybe putting them diagonally to add depth to my designs, there are definitely some things that aren't accomplished with the current builder. But for the most part, it's pretty good. It takes a bit to wrap your head around as you're building the ship in real time and on a grid, but once you come to terms with how the system works, you're rolling with design ideas and you're able to execute it relatively well. For my first ship, I tried my hand at making a Batwing, and the second one is a custom design I nicknamed the Red Hell. It was pretty bad though. Each attempt taking me upwards of 4 hours to figure out how I wanted to lay out the parts and how to get it to be in a style I enjoy. Other than being able to rotate things like structural and other parts, being able to orient things like the habitat sideways and make a different layout on the inside, maybe where one room leads into the other so it's a bit less confusing to navigate my own ship. The Red Hell is a Class B ship, so I could add a ton of rooms, but so many of the rooms didn't link into each other, and it's most likely my fault as the designer, but being able to rotate them around would make this issue easier to solve. The parts can take a while to unlock, and like the rest of Starfield's perk system, the latter levels are a bit of a grind to unlock. So you can see everything the shipbuilder has to offer, but it's definitely going to take some time. This is the highlight of the game in my opinion. Kudos to the designers, as you can tell they put a lot of effort into it. Aside from free orientation of parts, more curved structures, a decal editor would be the cherry on top, as who wouldn't want to brand their ship with different decals and truly go ham with the paint job. I can see why they didn't want to go this route, but I think it'd be a good way to spice up people's designs and make the ships even more unique than they can be now. I feel like the biggest offense, or should I say defense, as I see a lot of people using this to prop the game up on a pedestal, is the fact that next year we'll get the creation kit and along with it a surplus of modded content. This is my honest take. Modded content doesn't make your game suddenly good. If it's a mediocre game that's then filled with the work from talented creators fleshing out your incomplete project, then that means the mods are good, but not the game itself. The premise of modders being able to fully mod planets is exciting, and yeah, I'm waiting on the Star Wars mods myself, but acting as if this is an excuse for a few months of a dry game, when this is the launch, just leaves a bad taste in my mouth. The game feels half-baked in the content that should be quality, such as the story, characters, and exploration, and instead of Bethesda having their efforts focused on polishing this, they wanted to meet the crazy claims of 1,000 planets. This is supposed to be a game you're going to be playing for years to come. If this is the game to be played for years to come, I don't want it. Take it back and improve the product. You know what's a game I could play yearly? Dishonored. It's not because Dishonored suddenly has new content or randomly generated things happening every year. It's that the game fills a niche that I love, which is stealth games, and it does it extremely well, making it one of the best in class and always a fun experience I can look for if I ever get that stealth itch. I definitely wouldn't be playing Starfield for something like this, as the game is stretched so far to appear as if it had content, only for the content to be a puddle's worth of depth. While mods enhance the lackluster experience by Bethesda, yeah, 100%, this is how it's been for years, but it's such a shame considering the base game should be filled with things that I'm excited about and thankful towards the devs for putting their all into this game. This is something that Todd has wanted to do for a long time, about 25 years apparently, but it doesn't feel like it's been worth the wait sadly. The biggest issue with waiting for mods to add the real content is what's going to happen to the console and PC Game Pass players. Not only do they have to deal with a neutered game for potentially ever, as even though mods will be a thing on console, how are you going to find a way to get the script extender working on Xbox, Bethesda? How about your PC Game Pass subscribers, as this is also something they can't use? No? Well then I hope the Xbox gamers and the Game Pass boys enjoy the retextures and few mods that will be able to work. A lot of the high-end mods that people will be excited for is something that they'll have to watch from the sidelines for, as it's a shame since the script extender and other tools are going to be needed that in past games has not been available to made work on console or Game Pass. Maybe this is going to change with Starfield, as it seems Todd Howard is excited to talk about all this once they have the creation kit set up, but for right now as it stands, I wouldn't get too hype if you're on one side of the electric fence. It's a shame when I see people saying they got a PC just to play Starfield with mods, when they drop only to try to play them on the Xbox app, and the realization hits them, if they're gonna want the beefy mods, they're gonna have to fork over another $70 just for the Steam version. Ridiculous. In my initial draft of this video, I was harping on the game pretty harshly. I don't hate Starfield, but I just feel like Bethesda's formula isn't what it used to be, and their newer titles get farther and farther from their past games that I hold near and dear in my heart. Maybe some people truly did love Starfield or enjoy it heavily, but I can't say I'm one of those, and I also can't recommend it for the box price of $70. The game sure has 1,000 planets, I just wish it was also stacked with 1,000 fun things to do. It's by no means the worst game ever, but it feels average at best. I didn't talk about everything the game has to offer though, as some of these aren't systems I've personally engaged with, as they didn't interest me much since I wasn't invested in the universe. This would be the outpost building and homeowning among other things I may have forgotten. The music is relatively stellar. It didn't stick out much and felt as if it fit the game pretty well, but it didn't impress me the way an Elder Scrolls soundtrack of past titles has. The romances of the companions themselves feel a bit awkward, as the flirt options are the way you're meant to progress those relationships, but honestly it feels forced from the player's part. I don't think I should be forced to use a big flirt button each time I want to get closer or progress my relationship with somebody. Overall, Starfield is a game that you can have fun in, but in such a great year for gaming, I can't say I'd recommend it over some of the other slam dunks that have dropped. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know what you thought about the game, or if you disagreed with my critiques. I'd be happy to hear it. Also, small side note, but the Armored Core video I made got over 400 views, which is insane to me at the time of recording. I even gained 8 subscribers out of it, so thank you to everybody who enjoyed that video and either commented, liked, or just watched it as is, as I'm shocked but thankful for the support. See you in the settled systems, friends. Or not. And enjoy the rest of your day.